Good afternoon and welcome to today's 5x5 Composer Chat event. It is my pleasure to introduce 5x5's artistic director and flutist, Laura Lentz.
Hello, and thank you everyone for joining us today. This is the third of 5 composer chats we're presenting this spring. In this series, we invite you, the audience, to meet and interact with composers and their music through performance and conversation. Today's composer chat, A Tiny Dream, features composer Anthony R. Green, composer and co-founder of Castle of Our Skins, which celebrates Black artistry in classical music. We will also meet multimedia artist Sally Jay Sparrow, who is the animator for the new video of Anthony's work we will premiere today. 5x5 continues to find new ways to bring the music and the people who make that music to you. We have a wonderful creative and technical team behind the scenes making these programs possible, but we ask for your patience with us if you experience any technical bumps. We are grateful for support from the Genesee Valley Council on the Arts, the Rochester Community Foundation, Rochester Institute of Technology Performing Arts, Wegmans, Genesee Valley Orchestra and Chorus, the Eastman Community Music School, and individual donors who have been so generous these past months. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our Composer Chats host, Evan Meccarello. Evan directs 4 orchestras in New York and Connecticut and leads a contemporary classical ensemble for students at the Hochstein School. Evan?
Thank you, Laura. Good afternoon and welcome to our third Composer Chat. Today we feature Anthony R. Green and the premiere of 5x5's music video for his piece, A Tiny Dream. We are so pleased to also share this space with Sally Jay Sparrow, who created the animation for the video. We're delighted to have our audience live in Zoom with us, as well as on Facebook Live watching. Thanks for being here. 5x5 advises everyone listening to think about grabbing a pair of headphones for the music that is coming up. It's always a nice idea in order to hear the music in a little bit better quality, if you can. The creative output of Anthony R. Green, composer, performer, social justice activist, includes musical and visual creations, interpretations of original works or works in the repertoire, collaborations, educational outreach, and more. Behind all of his artistic endeavors are the ideals of equality and freedom. These ideals manifest themselves in diverse ways in a composition, a performance, a collaboration, or in social justice work. As a composer, Anthony R. Green's works have been presented in over 20 countries, and he has received commissions from Community Music Works, Make Music Boston, Celebrity Series Boston, and the Robert McCormick Percussion Group, as well as more soloists and ensembles. He has been a resident artist at arts institutions around the United States and Europe. As a performer, he has appeared in venues in the US, Cyprus, France, the Netherlands, the UK, Israel, Germany, Switzerland, Turkey, and South Korea, working with student and emerging composers, as well as established composers like David Liptak, Renee C. Baker, Steve Reich, and George Crumb. Through music and entrepreneurship, Green comments on many issues related to social justice, with pieces on topics of immigration, civil historical links between slavery and current racial injustice in the United States, the contributions of targeted or minority groups to humanity, and more. Green's most important social justice work has been with Castle of Our Skins, a concert and education series organization dedicated to celebrating Black artistry through music. As co-founder, associate artistic director, and composer in residence, Anthony Green's work with Castle of Our Skins has included concert and workshop curation, community outreach, lecturing about the history and politics around Black composers of classical music, and much more. Anthony, welcome, and thanks so much for chatting with us today.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
We really appreciate your time. Where are you calling in from today?
From Hartford, Connecticut.
That's great. Because I understand you live mostly in Europe these days. Is that correct?
Yes, I moved to the Netherlands in 2013.
Great. Well, we're glad you're here. We're so glad to share this space with you. We
Yes.
would like to start out with a look into the important work you do through Castle of Our Skins. I know this is a topic that merits its own entire interview and discussion, but can you tell us an overview of how Castle of Our Skins fosters curiosity across cultures and celebrates Black artistry?
Definitely. So when Castle of Our Skins was formed in 2013, Ashley Gordon, who's the other co-founder and the current artistic and executive director, uh, we both turned to each other and realized that we, between the two of us, couldn't really name more than about 8 Black composers. We both are Black and had spent more than cumulatively more than 15 years in various universities and conservatories. And we wanted to correct this gap in our conservatory and university training. So we started doing all this research and realized that the world of Black composers is so much bigger than what we have been led to believe in our training. And we knew that we had to present this music and these stories to a wider public. So our first season consisted of one concert at the end of the season in 2014 and one educational project, which is a piece that I wrote with Ashley for solo narrating violist, Wonder Why. And she performed that piece in, I would say, about 3 or 4 different educational institutions. And it was successful and our concert was successful and our second year grew, our third year grew. Now we are in our 8th year and we did not anticipate Castle of Our Skins getting to this point where I'm pretty sure, have influenced programming, especially in the Boston area, but probably in a wider area as well. We've had college residencies at Keene State College, the Launchie School of Music, Gettysburg College in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. We've had international projects in the Netherlands, where I live, and also in Bulgaria. And over the pandemic, we turned our season digital. So I gave a piano recital. We launched the Black Composer Miniature Challenge and connected with so many wonderful Black composers around the world. We have 2 composers in Africa, 1 composer in the UK, and we are just preaching the gospel of Black music, not only from the United States, but throughout the world and also throughout time, right? So we do play works by Vicente Lusitano and Ignatius Sancho and Chevalier de Saint George, all of these composers who unfortunately are no longer with us, but whose stories need to be expressed in the concert stage and in the history books as well. And we also try to recognize the importance of these stories by weaving in different artistic practices to create a level of communication for our audiences that is multi-sensory. So we work with spoken word artists, with writers, with fashion designers, with historians, with visual artists, with dancers, with culinary artists, because a good reception is a really good reception. And we just try to paint a big, clear picture for everybody so that our audiences can walk away fulfilled in ways that just normal concerts don't usually do. So that's a little bit about what we do. You can always check us out at www.castleskins.org.
Thank you so much, Anthony. Really remarkable work that's being taken up around the country and internationally, and we're very thankful for your little mini overview there. Recent studies from Yale University and other organizations show that Rochester, New York, where 5 by 5 is based, is among the most segregated cities in our nation. what things should we as concert goers, lovers of classical music, do to affect change in the segregation of our concert spaces and music communities?
I think that actually starts before music and outside of the concert hall. I think it's a responsibility for as many people as possible to recognize the segregation that's within their own respective localities. Excuse me for the background noise. And try to do desegregation work in your own localities outside of the concert hall. And it's only when we start to do this work, that's when we can start to say, hey, we have this chamber ensemble, we have this organization, we have this community orchestra, and they put on these events. I would love for you to come with me. And then there's the work that the ensembles have to do, right? There's the work on the behalf of the orchestra to research what the demographic of their locality is and start to play music and have programming that really reaches out to this demographic, right? But I cannot stress this enough. If we are a professional orchestra or a chamber ensemble or soloists, then our programming of music by Black composers, by Latinx composers, by disabled composers, by queer composers. This programming has to be in our educational work, but also our professional on-stage work. Because too often I see orchestras going into the communities and saying, okay, we're gonna play Florence Price for the little children. And then you see their main stage work and it's still Beethoven, Brahms, Tchaikovsky. And this needs to stop. This type of programming has to happen everywhere. Otherwise, you're just being performative.
Right. So there's this separation that we witness between educational family concerts and the main stage philharmonic series, and
Yeah,
that is something that needs to be seriously considered, right?
exactly.
There's some questions coming in live on Facebook, and I thought I'd read this one from a white educator who's asking, I see composers of new and experimental music as having a unique role potentially in promoting diversity and inclusion in classical spaces. Could you share some thoughts on how one can use contemporary or experimental music to build on anti-racist work? I imagine, Anthony, that you might see this as a big part of that new music.
Yeah, definitely. And outside of Castle of Our Skins, in my own performance practice, which is extremely experimental, I incorporate movement, fixed media audio, projected images, as well as performance art, more closely related to what visual artists do. And I combine all of this with music to tell a story that reflects the nature of Black people in the United States. This project of mine is called the Zoom In Project, and currently the Zoom In Project consists of works by Renee Baker, by myself, some improvisations, some notated works as well, and I'm commissioning composers to write pieces for me for this project. And what is amazing about the presentations of this project is that what I do is quite abstract, and people can get this emotional journey and feel this emotional connection to what I do. And afterwards, I have Q&A sessions, and that's when I get to talk about, for instance, the history of lynchings, because one of the pieces deals with lynchings. And I get to talk about Black oppression from the police departments and policing in general in the United States. And another thing is I've presented this project both in the United States as well as in Europe. So the questions that I field from Europe are much different than the questions that I get in the United States. And I view all of this as a part of anti-racism work through contemporary performance and composition.
Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for sharing about this work in that is really something we want to be at the beginning of this conversation because of how important it is. There's a lot more I could ask you about this and that we should be hearing about this, but we'd really like to also hear about your music, A Tiny Dream, that will be premiering a new video for today. I think this discussion of the very experimental parts of your performance practice are a gateway into asking you about where you're coming from musically in the piece A Tiny Dream that 5 by 5 is going to play. Perhaps you could share with us some of the musical inspirations, the what place you are in, what kind of musics go into this, since you're someone who writes opera, who writes, experimental works, writes chamber music and vocal. Could you share some of that background with us?
Certainly. So when I was first starting to study composition officially during my sophomore year at Boston University, I remember writing these piano preludes. And one of these preludes was quite meditative. And I would say it drew upon some of the ideas that are happening in China Gates, for instance, by John Adams. Um, ostinatos, melodies, counterpoint, but a counterpoint that's separated and happens over a long period of time. So when I went to compose A Tiny Dream, I was tapping into that old part of myself, that Anthony Green from sophomore year, and wanting to see if I could perhaps build upon that in a way that I hadn't really explored before in any of my other pieces. I'm one of these people that I guess takes this Steven Soderbergh approach to composition. So Steven Soderbergh wants to direct movies in multiple different genres. And I also like to compose pieces in multiple different genres because I think we have, as composers, a wide palette. And why not take advantage of all of those colors on that palette? So it was a real fun exercise for me to compose this piece, not necessarily anticipating such a wonderful interpretation and performance from 5 by 5, but I'm super, super grateful that this piece now has a life.
You gave a beautiful little note about this piece, that it was written to pay tribute to the existence of our past precious moments, as well as those future moments that will eventually become our tiny dreams. And there's a quotation here that I hope you would share with the audience because I think it offers a good window into talking about where Sally Jay Sparrow took the animation as well.
Definitely. So just a little bit about those past precious moments. The first time I went to Europe, I first arrived in London and then I went to France and I spent a couple of days in Paris. And I remember fondly composing this piece for flute and piano, sitting in a bench behind the Cathédrale Notre Dame. And I also remember working on this piece in a really small loft that was set above in this room in a north part of Paris that I had found on some website that linked people renting out rooms of their homes for the night. This was way before Airbnb. And I remember when I started writing A Tiny Dream, little little flashes of that time in Paris started to come into my mind, and I just thought, those are tiny dreams. I can't relive that experience in the way that I lived it at that time, but I always have those memories. And the more that time passes, the more those memories really become these tiny dreams that we can close our eyes and have little flashes of. So the quote is from one of my favorite songs by Ani DeFranco, and the song is Gray. And the quote is, "Every time I blink, I have a tiny dream." And the Ani DeFranco song is admittedly a little bit depressing, but I just extracted that quote and used that to compose this piece.
Yeah, I have to say that when I heard about this and read your description of the work, I almost getting this telescopic image of our perception of memory, right? Expanding in different directions. And there's a way that the ostinati, the repeating rhythmic figures, and then the long lines over top of that sort of seem to really evoke that, for me at least. Uh, this is a. Could you talk a little bit about how you approached the instruments, and what about Five by Five's unique instrumentation pushed you in certain ways for this orchestration that was commissioned for this ensemble?
Definitely. So the instrumentation of this piece was a little bit different. And when 555 approached me about collaborating, I mentioned that I have this piece that almost fits their instrumentation, and I would love to make a version that fits the unique instrumentation of 555. So when that was mutually agreed upon, it was wonderful to just turn, for instance, a cello into a contrabass and remove the percussion and think about adding percussive elements into the 5x5 instrumentation. So you'll hear some tapping, you'll hear some percussive sounds from the electric guitar, and I also wanted to just timbrally explore these possibilities. I know that Laura, for instance, is not a big piccolo player, and there are some high parts in the flute part. So I had to basically trust her to play some of those high notes on an alto flute, which I believe she had reservations with at first, but then said, oh yeah, this works and it sounds good. So it was also wonderful just to have that relationship of experimentation and lead to this wonderful final recording that we have.
Yeah, it's really interesting what you say about not having the percussionist that was originally part of the piece, right? Because Five by Five's instrumentation of flute, clarinet, bass, electric guitar, and piano is actually a rhythm section with a couple of woodwind instruments, right? You have the keyboard, the guitar, and the bass that is found in a lot of the popular genre music that you have referenced already in other works in other places where I've heard you speak about your influences. So there's something there about here's a kind of a rhythm section that is in within the work. Did that strike you?
Definitely. Yeah, it works because this piece has this motor perpetual quality. So envisioning those low end instruments as a rhythm section and really composing music with that functionality worked perfectly for the 5x5 instrumentation. It's like the perfect glove on a hand.
That's wonderful. At this time, I would like to invite the animator of the video, Sally Jay Sparrow, to join us. Sally is a young multimedia artist hailing from Red Bank, New Jersey. She works in a variety of character-based applications, particularly developmental work, editorial, graphic design, and multimedia dimensional illustration. Her professional experience includes working for Toricon, Anime Boston, Kaleidoscope Me, and Goodbye Goodbye. Welcome, Sally. Thanks for being with us.
Hi.
Can you share with us a little bit about what processes you use to create this animation?
Yeah. So initially, I had a meeting with Anthony and Laura about the entire concept. I listened to an early live recording of the song and talk with them through some imagery and some concepts. And once we had that down, I started to make some storyboards, which is basically showing still sketches of key moments in the animation so that I could kind of show them what I was thinking visually so they could see a little bit about what it would look like, even if it was kind of rough. And I progressed from there to put it to the music and then put all of the actual final assets on top of that. So it was just building on top of those step by step.
That's great. So this was really a collaboration between composer and animator with some back and forth and some discussion, and were there any arguments?
No, not really. I wanted to work really close with everyone because I could go and make an animated video of any song I wanted, but this is a different opportunity where I'm working with the people that were all involved in making it. And actually, we came to a lot of the same conclusions on our own. Like, I didn't talk to anyone about my initial visions for some of the imagery. And when I was presenting it in our meetings, a lot of the same things came up about nature and about different animals and about eyes in particular. Initially, one of the things that I had brought up was having a forest of birch trees, which tend to look like they have a bunch of eyes on them. And so I thought that was something that was interesting as far as like a bit of a whimsical element and something that goes back and forth between something that you see imagine, and that ended up being something that everyone else involved was also on board with. The eyes as a symbol was something that we all came together on.
Yeah, so one of the big motifs of this video is the eye, right? It begins with an eye, and there's something about sight and memory and these tiny dreams that all have wrapped together. So this is something that we're seeing an eye, and then we're seeing what the eye sees, or is it what our eyes sees? These kind of layers are going on, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the eyes are a very common thing to use in a lot of different stories, but the eyes are the window to the soul. So really, to me, anything that has to do with that kind of represents the way that we see the world and the way that we interpret everything, and B, like the connection between two different people. Like, a lot of people find eye contact really important, and it's that same kind of feeling. So using the eyes as something to represent both what these creatures and people were actually seeing and what they were feeling about the world seems like it made a lot of sense to me.
Yeah. So while there isn't an explicit story told in this video, there's some abstract moments, but there are also very concrete images of nature and of a woman who experiences nature maybe, or remembers nature, and there's uh, a layering, a beginning and a return to this woman's image. Is there anything here that's I don't know, autobiographical or pulled from your life when you're thinking about what you did with this creation?
Yeah, I mean, not strictly autobiographical, but it did relate a lot to my feelings as far as being like stuck inside all the time and whatnot. We started this project in the middle of winter, and so I was very much in that mode of thinking, oh, I'd love to go do things, but the only thing you can do right now are things that are outdoors, and that's kind of hard in Rochester in winter. And so the vision of nature and connecting with people kind of intermixed together in that way.
That's great. I would like to, at this point, invite the members of Five by Five and Anthony to turn on their cameras and join us. In addition to Laura Lentz, who is the flutist we saw at the top of the program, we have Marcy Bacon, clarinet, Sungmin Shin, electric guitar, Eric Polenik, bass, and Haeyeon Jun on piano. Hi, everybody. Great to see you. Laura, I was wondering if you could tell us about how you connected with Sally to produce this video. I know you've done work in solo flute projects with animation, a handful of those, it seems to me, at this point. Could you share how this worked out?
Absolutely. So I'm on faculty at Rochester Institute of Technology, and we are very fortunate to have so many wonderfully talented students going through animation, graphic design programs. And working with the Performing Arts Department, there's always a student who is doing work for the faculty, producing flyers and different designs and stuff. And so I got connected to our graphic design artist, Lauren Pertula, who does a lot of work for 5x5. And we started this project with her. She became unable to complete it. She introduced us to Sally, and so the rest is history.
That's great. I'm wondering if anyone can, has a memory or would like to share. Is there something Anthony said when you were collaborating on this video or on this recording that particularly stuck with you about the music or about the feeling of the piece?
I remember him referring to some of the soaring melodic lines as a reference to Schubert, which totally influenced how I played them.
Thank you. Yeah, that's very nice image.
Yeah, I
This,
think I certainly remember the discussing the energy at certain points of the piece, and then perhaps different ways of showing that energy, whether it's through how we attack each note or how the beginning of note each sounds, how the note's sustained, and yeah, that was a really nice time to spend with Anthony discussing the piece and to really develop an interpretation with the composer right there.
fantastic.
If I could quickly chime in, I can't remember when the conversation happened, but the mention of the Ani DeFranco song, and I can't remember when that exactly happened, but I remember when we were going to record the piece, we revisited that, and I think it was a conversation with Anthony that kind of really sparked that idea again. To listen to the song, we all, I think, listened to it together, and we all listened to it separately. And as far as I think the rhythm and the groove and how the song came together on that end was it was a really big a factor for us.
Yeah, this piece starts and ends with a repeated rhythmic figure, this ostinato pattern that gets passed around and metamorphoses. What does it feel like to get in and out of a groove like that, or when you reach a change?
I think that's the thing we spend the most amount of time rehearsing and practicing. For me, when you're picking up that rhythm from another player, it's almost trying to like jump on a train when it's already moving. And so you have to, before you even play the note, you have to have the same energy level as that figure and the player you're taking it from. And it's like handing off a relay stick in a race. For a moment in time, before you're actually handing it and you're both connected, you're still at the same energy traveling. And that's a kind of a unique thing that can happen in musical ensembles.
Yeah, and what I love about that is, especially in a group with as disparate instruments as a double bass handing off to a clarinet or to a piano, is how different these instruments have to attack the notes to make that handoff happen. It's not two Olympic runner athletes that are the same build, handing off the baton. It's maybe, I don't know, like a champion weightlifter and a synchronized swimmer running next to each other who have to make that connection, right? So
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of other bass players will appreciate this, but I do sometimes feel like I have to outrun them so I'm at the same speed.
yes, I love that. I can certainly relate to that as a conductor too. That's great. Well, I think now would be a good time to actually watch this video. And we want to invite our audience members to feel free to respond with questions about anything you are hearing. And we'll be relaying these questions to the artists here as we continue the rest of our chat. Also, be aware that if we do have any hiccup in the stream, this video, music video, will be available along with this entire chat to watch afterward on Facebook right away, and then a little later on YouTube. So, Anthony, Sally, thanks so much for this beautiful project and arranging this piece in animation for 5x5 to play. And Zoom audience members who are with us, you are welcome to turn on your camera at the end of the video. Stay muted, but if you want to share the experience of being in this live audience together, you're welcome to show us in some kind of visual appreciation. At this time, we will enjoy the premiere of 5x5's performance, Sally Jay Sparrow's animation, and Anthony R. Green's music, A Tiny Dream. Bravo, bravo, everybody. Thanks for showing your appreciation. It's wonderful to see.
Yes, thank you all so much. It was really wonderful. Thank you, Sally. You're amazing.
And we welcome anyone watching live to type in Facebook their questions to Anthony the composer or Sally the animator or any of the musicians of 5x5 who are all here with us live for the next little while. We'll have a little bit of more chat here about Anthony R. Green's piece, A Tiny Dream, and the animation. Bravo 5x5. There's a lot going on here, and it's something that I think will bear repeated listening and watching in the time to come. Sally, I've heard that you were a musician before becoming a visual designer and animator. Can you talk a little bit about your relationship to music and its impact in your illustrative animated work? I see that Sally's camera is not currently on, so we may come back to that question in a moment. But instead, I'll ask some of the 5x5 musicians who are here on screen. Can you talk just a little bit about the recording process and what it was like putting something like this together during the pandemic? Did you record live or rehearse live at all? I know as of a few months ago, we weren't yet feeling safe to do that. So could you share a little bit about that rehearsal process?
Sure. First, I'll say that we performed this piece live at the last live concert that we performed on March 9th at the University at Buffalo, just before everything started to shut down. So we had that experience of performing in the same room together and rehearsing for a period of weeks and months. So then as the pandemic wore on and we realized that it was growing into this new project that we were exploring, we made the decision to record each separately in our own homes. And we had the wonderful assistance of Mark Webster from Blue on Blue Studio to help us do things like advise us on microphone placement and making sure that the flute and clarinet articulation work well together. And in the one spot where the bass and the bass clarinet actually create kind of a layered texture like this that becomes the duo ostinato, that we had to make sure that we were matching in how we did that as well. It was a really good experience, and yet I was glad that we had the experience of playing it together before we did that.
Yeah, so this piece for 5x5 is really tied into the pandemic experience, being the last piece you played and now coming around full circle after more than a year, recording it after going through so far this much of the pandemic. And I think that's really reflected in Sally's animation too, this feeling of imagination and wanting to be able to leave the house a bit and connect with other people. Sally, I'm so glad you're back on with us. I was wondering if you could share a little bit about your past experience as a musician and talk about how that influences your relation to music when you're animating or illustrating. How does music play out in your work? Oh, and we don't quite hear your voice yet. We had a little technical problem there. So maybe you'll be able to connect to computer sound or one of these other things to come back in. But until then, I'll throw another question out there from the Facebook verse. There's some wonderful comments coming in. Ian writes, so poignant and beautiful all around. Incredible work, everyone. Andrea says, I'm a sucker for repeating melodic lines, and the video added to the nostalgia of it all. Mona writes, the feeling of holding the chalk and perhaps not knowing what to draw is something that came out to her. So there's something, like Anthony, you were saying, about bringing in multiple senses that's really powerful. You talked about that in your work with Castle of Our Skins, the way you bring in multidisciplinary artists, everything from culinary artists to visual and more. Could you perhaps share with us some other projects you've done that are bringing in multi-disciplines? Have you had an animation done of your work before this?
I have not had an animation done of my work before, so this collaboration has been such a breath of fresh air for me and such a wonderful surprise. And I'm so, so grateful for this opportunity. Um, I will say one of the most fantastic multidisciplinary projects that I was involved in with Castle of Our Skins was a project with the Fog X installation that happened in various parks in Boston. So in half-hour intervals, this stream of fog was released from this setup that was placed in trees. And we created this project that started before the stream happened. And then while the fog was being emitted, there was a transformation. And then the fog dies down and the performers have become this new thing. And we worked with a dancer who's also a spoken word artist who wrote the text that was spoken and sometimes shouted throughout the performance because it was an outdoor performance. We also had trombone and viola movement, and then I created an electronic track which was composed of different recorded elements, including my voice and auxiliary percussion. So it was really, really crazy, and the end result was just fantastic.
That's great. I think as new music people of various kinds, we're all about the crazy projects, and one of the things we look forward to most is, as we move forward, is to find new ways to connect. I wanted to ask about the. We spoke a little about the process and the recording and the feelings. Wondered if one of the musicians might share a feeling from this music, or an inspiration, a memory, something that you drew on when you were recording this piece of music, something that might characterize some what you played. And hello, Sally. I'm glad you're back. Maybe this time we can get that. And Sally, I invite Sally. Maybe you can type a response, and I'll read it too, if that's not working the other way.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I think something just stopped working with my camera microphone, so these headphones are gonna be fine.
No worries. Well, but I'm glad you're back.
All right.
Beautiful.
Yeah, so you asked about being a musician.
Yes.
Yeah, I was a musician long before I had decided I wanted to be a designer. My parents kind of always raised me around music, and a lot of those like young kid programs about making music with like very simple things like the recorder and little percussion instruments and stuff like that. But they also exposed me to a lot of different music, and it was a mix of things that actually had a lot of visual elements to them in the beginning that really stuck with me. So things like Fantasia and Fantasia 2000 were very early things that I remember connecting to, and especially actually Yellow Submarine, the Beatles movie, was something that I was obsessed with as a kid. And a lot of it was a mix of that music and how the visuals interacted with it. And sometimes it was like a literal translation of something that was going on in a song, or it was just more of a rhythmic interpretation. So that mix of visual elements really stuck with me as I continued to play music growing up, and I ended up playing the saxophone and the guitar in various different types of bands. So that kind of always carried with me throughout a lot of my life. And so it, of course, immediately worked its way into my design work when I decided I wanted to be a designer.
Yeah, Mark Webster, our recording engineer for the recording, said that you animate like a musician. Before knowing some of this background, so there's definitely a lot of things about healing rhythm and construction of in a musical way that come through very strongly. So brava on all of that. We are going to wrap up in just a few minutes. If you have an additional question for the fabulous Anthony Green and Sally Jay Sparrow, or any of the members of 5x5, speak now. And I just want to say thank you to everybody for putting together such a great project. Perhaps we could have another minute here where we just hang out for a second and enjoy each other's company. You can share something about the music or about life that's going on for you. Anthony, what's coming up next for you? What are some of the big projects, musical and otherwise, on the horizon?
Way too many to discuss, to be honest. I would like to take a moment actually to say that I'm about to teach a class at the Berlin University of the Arts. And the class is called They Think These Bodies Can't. And what I do is examine the contributions of women and Black people and disabled people and queer people, trans and non-binary people, and other minority groups within the world of classical composition from the year 800 to the present. And it's a class that hopefully will inspire people to, in their respective artistic practices, draw on these long-term relationships and zoom out and see where the holes are and where the holes have been in their own relative educations and try to fill in those holes. So I'm really excited about that class that's coming up. Yeah, and I could list all of the performances, but I'm afraid that I'm gonna miss one and I don't want to slight anybody. So I'll just mention that class and mention that I do have quite a bit of performances and I'm really excited about every single one of them.
Well, you can share with us your website that will have presumably a more exhaustive, complete list. How should people find you?
Unfortunately, my website is super outdated, but my website is anthonyrgreen.com. Thank you, Mona, for putting my website in the chat. And it's much better on my website to link to my social media and really specifically to my Instagram, which is where I've been the most active. So I've been sharing quite a bit of my upcoming projects on Instagram, and you can always find some of those performances there.
And this course at UDK, is that something that can be audited or signed up for virtually, or is that only for students in Berlin?
Yes, it can be audited, and Eastern time zone, it would start at 8 in the morning on Tuesday.
Okay. Well, it'll definitely be something to think about. Thank you very much. And Sally, how may we find you?
My website is sallyjsparrow.com, and I'm also Sally J Sparrow on Instagram. I have a Twitter too. I don't use that one as much, so Instagram is the more up-to-date thing.
All right. Well, Anthony and Sally, on behalf of 5x5, thank you so much for being with us. It has been such a pleasure.
It's been a great pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for putting together this project.
We hope to see and hear you soon in other wonderful projects. 5x5 is grateful to all of you watching at home. You can support further music by heading to 5by5music.com and clicking support. Please consider helping communities with less access to the internet by donating to these Rochester-based initiatives to address the digital divide, Action for a Better Community, and the Children's Institute. You can find those links at 5by5music.com and in the chat. Finally, we would like to invite everyone to the next composer chat, Tamboreno, with Miguel de Aguila. We'll be premiering a new video featuring Miguel's work and talking with Mark Webster from Blue on Blue Recording Studio, who created the music video. Tune in on Saturday, May 22 at 1:30 p.m. 5x5 is Laura Lentz, Marcy Bacon, Sungmin Shin, Eric Polenik, and Haeyeon Jun. Our technical team is Terry Bacon and Mark Webster, with assistance from Logan Barrett and Mona Segatola-Slami. I'm Evan Meccarello. Thank you for listening.